Hi, I'm Dana and welcome to another episode of Learning to be Autistic. This is just a little series where I'm trying to figure out who I am as an autistic person, as a person in general, and hopefully offer some relatability to other autistic people, a little bit of education to neurotypical people, and generally just like normalise that some of us are autistic and it's fine. Now this is episode 12 and I recently realised that although I've spoken about how I got my diagnosis and how it feels to find out you're autistic and things like that, I never actually spoke about how I figured out that I was autistic to the point of going to my GP and being like, I think I'm autistic, please can you help me find out? So I thought today we'd discuss the things that added up for me to be like, oh crap, I think I'm autistic. So I met my partner Rich when I was 16 and he had already been diagnosed with autism as a child, and straight away we just got on incredibly well. Like I just really enjoyed being around him. I found him very easy to socialise with and communicate with. But I didn't really think anything of it for quite a long time because I'd had a lot of mental health issues from the age of around 12. My anxiety definitely started earlier, but it was when I was 12 that I started having my parents take me to the GP and be like, there is something wrong with her. So I was just trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And the doctors will often tell me, maybe it's BPD, maybe you're bipolar, maybe it's just depression and anxiety. And although I definitely considered myself to be depressed and anxious, it just felt like that wasn't quite it, you know? Like I'd push myself and really try to recover and be better. And I could do it. I didn't relate to other depressed people, I suppose is the point. I could do in some ways a lot more than a lot of people that I knew that were depressed, or things that you read online and like. But in other ways I also could do much, much less, and it just didn't really add together to make me feel like that was a diagnosis for me, even though I've definitely had times I have been depressed. So it was when I was around 19, I think. No, I would have been 18. It was when I was 18 that my boyfriend very gently suggested to me, do you think you might be autistic? And I have an older brother that's autistic. We're estranged now, I suppose. I don't speak to him or intend to have anything to do with him for the rest of my life. But because I had an older brother that's autistic, it was also one of those well, it is in the family. But I was also because I have an autistic older brother, I was well, I don't do this, I don't have this, I don't like this, so I'm not autistic, that's not me. But it played on my mind enough that I started doing a little bit of Googling. And it was on one of these little Google binges that I started reading about how autism tends to present in women and females and girls versus most men. And I'm still learning more about all of that, and I do think that it's more so how we're sort of nurtured and risen. It depends more on how we grow up, essentially, more so than I'm a woman so I experience this and you're a man so you experience, I don't think it really works like that. But originally I was reading up a lot about female presenting autism, I suppose, and it was the first time in my entire life that I related to something. It was, honestly, I was really scared and I was really anxious, and I was it was a very oh fuck moment, because I was reading all of these symptoms and traits and whatever else you want to call them, and I was just, it was like reading about myself. And then as I got deeper into that and started reading about people's experiences, especially in school, I was very, oh crap, could I be autistic? And I just didn't know, you know? I'd had so many different diagnoses put us it could be this, it could be that I felt like a gigantic fraud. I was the doctors think it's this and they're medically trained people, surely they would pick up if I was autistic. But then obviously there's the other side of, well, I mask real bloody hard, so they wouldn't pick up that I'm autistic. They might pick up that I'm a little bit weird, that I don't have the best social skills, but I don't present to strangers as being my authentic autistic self, which I'm still trying to find. So it was something I just sort of played with the idea of for a few months. And it just kept coming back to mind, you know. There'd be times when I was out and about, or even just in my house, and I'd do something or remember something from my childhood and be like, that sounds a little autistic, doesn't it? And like I say, I was just really scared and anxious about the whole thing. And eventually I was okay, I'm gonna have to talk to my mum. My dad had passed away not long earlier. I probably would have spoken to him with less of a good effect. So I brought it up to my mum. And she immediately was like, oh, well, yeah, some of the people that we spoke to when you were little thought you were autistic. And I was like, huh, what? So I have very vague memories of the majority of my childhood. I don't have like the photographic memory that people like to pretend every autistic person has. I have a terrible memory. So I very vaguely remember having speech therapy as a child. Found out from my mum that I was doing it for literally years because it wasn't that I couldn't speak properly, it was that I refused to speak properly to strangers and people I wasn't comfortable with. To the point where, and like I say, this is all knowledge from my mum, but apparently my nursery teacher had gone to him and been like, so what language are you raising Dana speaking? And my mum was like, well, she knows a little bit of Danish, but like she speaks English perfectly fine, like, you know, for any child that age. And it turned out that I did not speak to the nursery teacher in any language. I just sort of made noises at her. And that was when I got taken to a speech therapist. All I remember of speech therapy is that I used to get those little frogs that you can like press the back of and they jump when I did something right. And that I eventually got moved into like a group one and I hated it. I remember my dad telling me like, we need to go in like half an hour to start getting ready. And I went downstairs, I crawled under the kitchen table and I was like, I'm not going. And my dad eventually found me and was like, yes, you are. And I remember just like clinging to the table like while he tried to pull me out. And then when that wasn't working, he just picked the table up and I was like, oh fuck. Because like my dad was 6'8" and really fucking strong. So there was no chance that I wasn't going. And I remember driving there, like staring out the window, being in like a proper grump, getting to the place, walking in. And because it was like a speech therapy for kids, there's all sorts of different nooks and crannies and whatever. And I'd go into the Wendy house and just sit there. I wouldn't interact with other children. If the staff came over and were like, don't you want to? No. Sometimes I didn't even speak to them, I don't think. But that's all I remember of it. And apparently I was going to that for years. And then my mum also said that I had multiple teachers in primary school in like the early years say like, hey, do you think maybe Dana's autistic? And I think that I was lucky to have an older brother that was autistic in that way. Because I don't think it would have been brought up at all otherwise because I'm a girl. But my parents ignored it because I was a girl. My dad, especially from what my mum's told me, was just like, no, girls don't have autism. Doesn't happen. Nope. Which I think was more that I was very, very close with my dad as like a young child. So I think he just didn't want to admit there was something wrong with me, as most people see autism to be, which I don't. But yeah, so I brought it up to my mum and she told me all that. And I was sort of like, oh crap. Like I feel like if people thought I was autistic, even as a young child while I was like still developing, I feel like it's probably a good chance that I am. And then I've got my boyfriend sitting me down and being like, you do realise that your special interest is Lord of the Rings and Doctor Who, like we have entire rooms filled with merch of them, you're obsessed with them, they're special interests and you're autistic. You do this when you go out and socialise, you're like this, you do this. And it was very, I think I've spoken about it in other videos, but I felt like I was like having my identity and my personality taken away from me. Because suddenly all my little Dana quirks and the little weird things that Dana does, I was being told that actually they're autistic traits. And I was like, shit. So, this is going more into like how I actually got the diagnosis versus how I figured it out, because it was relatively easy for me to start thinking, hey, I might be autistic. But I was very, very reluctant to say like, I think I am. I was incredibly reluctant to do that. That's why I didn't access like any support. I didn't mention it online. I didn't tell anyone that I was fairly certain I was autistic because of imposter syndrome, I guess. I felt like a liar and a fraud if I said that. So I just went with like, oh, I am considering that there is a possibility that I could perhaps maybe be autistic. So I went to my GP, got incredibly lucky. It was a GP I'd never seen before since I'm vaguely convinced that it was one of those situations where like, you walk in and see him and then he vanishes in a puff of smoke and he wasn't actually there in the first place or something. I don't know, I got really lucky because I went in and sat down and I was like, my mum said that when I was a kid people thought I might be autistic. I have XYZ traits now. People have been trying to diagnose me with bipolar and BPD and depression, anxiety, and although I think I do show many signs of them, I relate to lots of symptoms, I don't think that's what I am. And this GP was just like, yeah, it sounds like you very, very well could be autistic. We'll get you in for the referral. following that, I got a letter that I'd been referred and I was on the waiting list. And then I was just left to wait for 3 years. And it's because I was left to wait for 3 years that I very much believe that self-diagnosed people should be able to access the community online. They should be able to like access help and support, because even if it turns out you're not autistic, there's a reason that you think you are. You know, you relate to lots of traits and something's probably going to help you. But also, I think most self-diagnosed people are autistic. They just haven't had the opportunity for whatever reason to be diagnosed yet. And you know, I really struggled during those 3 years. I dropped out of college for a second time. The house, like, we lived in a little flat, and that was a mess. That was a mess. I didn't do the dishes, I barely cooked, I barely cleaned. It was horrible. I was very, very down. I also moved house during that time, and that was a whole stressful affair. And I just, you know, I was trying to sort myself out and be a functioning person, but I just found it incredibly, incredibly difficult. And it would have been a lot easier had I had the support of the online autistic community. It would have been easier if I'd been reading other people's experiences and following people and all that jazz. But I was so terrified that I was going to be told I wasn't autistic that I felt like I'd be a fraud to even follow autistic people, you know, which is silly because neurotypicals can follow, you know, autistic people, neurodivergent people, disabled people. You should be following a diverse array of people, which I try to do. But I just felt like so much imposter syndrome over the idea of following someone that was autistic that I was like, no way, I cannot. I'm a fraud. I'm probably not even autistic and I'm just going to force my way into the community. So I didn't do anything. I didn't have any, you know, I had like my little support system around me of friends and family. But besides that, I had no help or assistance and it kind of really sucked. But then I finally had the assessment and they told me that you're definitely autistic, 100%, absolutely, you're autistic. And after so many years of questioning and wondering and being like, what's wrong with me? It was a gigantic relief. And it's from there that I've been able to access the community and find things that actually help me to be a more functioning person. And things have gone a lot better for me since receiving diagnosis. And I think it's very important that people have the opportunity to be diagnosed should they want to be. You know, even if I'd found out I wasn't autistic, that would have been a relief as well. Because it would have been like, okay, so it's not that, we can move on and find out what it is. You know, maybe it's something I can get medicine for. Maybe it's something that I can actually get rid of. And obviously autism isn't like that. And I'm not trying to ask for a cure for autism or anything, because it feels good to know why I am the way I am and how I can work with myself to be a better person and everything. I do not want a cure for autism. But if it had been, you know, BPD, bipolar, depression, it would have been nice to be able to get medicated and not have that affect me so strongly. But just getting a diagnosis stopped my autism from being a shitty for me, so that was fine. I just think for a lot of people, it's very clear to us and the people like close to us that are around us, whether or not we're autistic, if they're willing to accept that. I know there's lots of people's parents that see all of those autistic traits and are still just like, no, you're not autistic. That's because they're shitty parents. It's not because you're not autistic. Oh, that's a bit mean. They might not be shitty parents, but, you know, autism can be a lot to deal with as a parent, I suppose. And they're apprehensive and frightened, so they don't want to accept it. But you know what I mean? I hope someone knows what I mean. So yeah, that was how I figured out that I was autistic. Other people told me I was. Just other people continuously told me, like, I think you're autistic. And I was like, oh, fuck, am I? And then I was. So I'm going to leave it there for today. If you've enjoyed this video and want to see more content similar to this, it'd be really cool if you wanted to like and subscribe. Yeah. Whoever you are and wherever you are, I hope you're having a lovely morning, evening, afternoon, week, month, year. And I'll see you again in a few days.